I want to make this real for people because I want the emotion to be there as fuel so that they deal with something that's not pleasant to think about because they know it matters to people they care about.
Close your eyes and imagine that it has happened where everybody is at when you haven't done anything. Just feel that pain for 30 seconds. You can't even imagine the pain your family and your employees and your customers will go through. If you could just give us 2 or 3 hours or 2 or 3 minutes to provide some guidance, you could save a lot of nightmares.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to another week's edition of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and I want to welcome you back. I have a real treat in store for you. We brought back a good friend of mine, Alan Gassman. Alan has been an attorney now for over 35 years. He's one of the top rated on Martindale Hubbard AV peer review. He's been part of the asset protection and estate planning community for decades. Matter of fact, he's in the Estate Planning Hall of Fame. They actually have that very thing. For over a decade, he's been mine and Heather's personal attorney, and also represented many of the different businesses that I've had. He's done this for other clients inside the Maui Mastermind community. His firm has done that. He's a really smart attorney. Today, we're talking about something that many business owners don't like to think about, but in today's world, it's critical that you do, which is succession planning. Specifically, what happens if an emergency situation happens quickly where you're incapacitated or, heaven forbid, killed? What do you need to have done in advance with that? We have this in-depth conversation, but stay with us to the end of this, right? Alan's sharing his very best about things from how do you make sure you have the right non-solicitation and non-compete agreements? Should you or should you not have situations where you're giving a person in the business equity, and how does that affect the company in terms of the succession plan? What are some of the scary situations that he's seen his clients go through because of things that were or were not dealt with up front? But here's why I'm saying stay to the end. In the last 5 minutes of this episode of the podcast, Alan shares 3 simple things, and then I add 2 more, for a total of 5 simple things that you can do that would take you 1 or 2 hours probably in total time. But just like with Pareto's principle, it's the things that are very small. It's the 10% of things you could do that give you 80% or more of the succession planning value. And they're such easy steps. Now, don't just skip ahead to that section. Why? Because I think the context that you'll pick up in the first portion of the interview will make a big difference. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy this week's episode of The Business Coach with my dear friend, Alan Gassman. Well, Alan, welcome back to The Business Coach. How are you doing today?
Fine, David. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So those of you who don't know, Alan, Alan here. I know I gave the introduction beforehand, but I remember, Alan, every time I've been to visit your office in Florida. Now it's infrequent, and as I shared in the introduction, I've been a client for years, and we've shared mutual clients over time. But you have out front this sign that you have that daily changes. Every day there's some funny little quirky quote that's on the sign. What's the funny sign today? Do you remember when you came in?
Complicating lives since 1984. That's one of the favorite ones. I don't know what it says today, but that's the one that gets the most.
Complicating lives. I love it. I love it. So, hey, an attorney with a sense of humor. Imagine that. And I know what conferences you've spoken at some of our conferences before, audiences always are busting up from that part. But today we're going to talk about a serious matter. Succession planning for business owners. This idea of how do we make sure that whether it's a temporary situation or a longer term situation or a permanent situation, that we have good succession plans in place so that the business can maintain itself, whether it's through a short period of owner incapacitation or a longer period or forever period, in which case the business is oftentimes going to have to be sold. And so we don't want to lose value because while this is going on, the business falls apart. And now it's a distressed sale of a business, which maybe we get what the liquidation value of its assets are, even though it was once upon a time worth $25 million or more. So I'll start us off here, Alan, by asking you, there's this myth of invincibility. I mean, we as humans in general, business owners specifically, we're strong, we're invincible. Have you noticed that your clients, the thought of them getting hurt or being mentally incapacitated, or killed is something that it doesn't ever come to their consciousness, even when you start to bring it up with them.
For many, that is correct. For the most successful clients, they are realistic and they do understand and plan for the inevitable. But for many of us, it's not that interesting or exciting, or we're somewhat irresponsible and don't get around to it.
I'm going to ask you in a moment, give us 4 or 5 or 6 different things that you've seen a client where the succession plan became important because of something happened. I'll start off by sharing an example with our audience here, which is a coaching client that we worked with for a number of years, but this is now in year 1 of working together, roughly 6 or 7, 8 months after starting the work. She was out one day in the Bay Area, beautiful sunny day. She was riding her bike with her husband, going cycling on a bike path, so no cars involved. And as she was riding, the day became hotter, so she was taking off a jacket, a windbreaker she had while riding her bike. And as she took off the windbreaker, she lost control of the bike, wearing a helmet, fell very hard, had a significant concussion, which meant for 3 months she couldn't be in a lighted room. She needed to be in a dark room. She couldn't look at a computer screen. She wasn't able to do any work more than an hour in a day. It just was a very different part. Now, thankfully, in her case, she had started doing some of the strategic depth steps to cover her functions in the business, even just that 7, 8 month period, which protected her. However, she never would have thought, yes, she's concerned about getting hit by a car riding her bike, but taking off a windbreaker, causing a concussion, never crossed her mind before. Give us some of the things that you've seen temporarily or permanently take out a client such that succession planning really became important to have had in place, because I want our listeners to recognize this is not fiction. This is not a fable or fairy tale or a horror story. This is life, quite frankly.
Well, death comes to mind. I had a client in his early 60s who died yesterday, to the complete amazement of his spouse, his family, and me as well. He was very healthy. He was very active. He had not gotten around to finishing up his planning. And I got the phone call, and it wasn't a good call because the first question was, did he want to be buried or cremated? I had no idea. He never told me. And the second question is, what are we going to do with the business? And I don't know, because we never really got that far. At least usually I'll find out who they trust to help the wife or other spouse run the business in the event of death or incapacity. But I didn't get that from him. So that's going to be a not so pleasant roller coaster ride for a spouse who has never run a business with children who are too young to really help. So that's one example, and that happens far too often. The second example is a stroke. People have strokes. I don't know how common strokes are, but they seem to be common among my client base. And when you have that stroke, it's a loss of IQ of 30 to 40 points for a while, and inability to use your arms properly, and bad judgment. So now who's going to decide what to do when the business owner has had a stroke and really just doesn't have good judgment and is on a lot of medication? So we see that happen as well. The third thing we see happen among medical professionals and dental professionals is, hey, my back doesn't work anymore. I can't do it anymore. I've got the intellect, but I can't do the job. And it's a little bit too late for me to hire somebody where I could mentor them. And I sure wish I had, but I hadn't. I sure wish I had a lot more business interruption insurance. I wish I had a lot more disability insurance, but I don't. And then the fourth thing that we just saw on the west coast of Florida is everybody got flooded. Clearwater Beach was underwater. There was no beach anymore. It was Clearwater Sandbar, and not everybody could afford to refurnish their restaurant, or to change their bar, or to reopen their business, or to even afford to be able to keep their home, because people didn't think that would be a risk that they would have to address. So hurricanes, or your major customer pulling out, or your best 3 employees leaving with a bunch of your business when you die or become incapacitated. These are all things that we unfortunately see far too regularly.
Wow. There's so much in there. Hang on one second. I'm writing some of this down now, and we're going to come back to some of these point by point with that. So, when we think about succession planning, I know on our end, for years been teaching clients about how do you systematize a business to make it owner independent. And it requires building strategic depth, right? Good processes, procedures, systems, stable internal controls to make sure the systems are being used by people the right way at the right time. Cross training of team members, so it's not just one function can do it, and a culture that says this is what we do. And when we talk about succession planning, though, it's not just that. I'll give an example. I can think for a lot of clients of ours have really good systems and people know what other people are doing. But when the emergency happens, what they haven't done is they've never really made it clear who's the person who's in charge now. And they've never done the steps from the hardcore stuff, which is, for example, who's going to be dealing with things like accounts payable and payroll, right? One of the dental groups we work with, we just had this conversation a couple months ago, Alan, and we went through it, and they had one person who was really knowledgeable and had been doing their payroll for a decade, and this person was going to be retiring. And so now we need to backfill. But if it wasn't for that, what happens if she just got hurt unexpectedly? I've had clients who have someone in their office who does payroll. The owner themselves doesn't know how to go in and do the payroll part. And so now they're left going, well, how do I pay my people with that part? So succession planning is also about, even if we've got good strategic depth, it's about giving a clear game plan that says, hey, if something happens to me, this is the next person in charge with various levels. We'll come back to that. But I'm curious. So just going back to it, when somebody is incapacitated or heaven forbid dies, and that business is there, go into the far past. So it's a different client that now you're in a situation where you're trying to help the surviving spouse sell a company, and that company is becoming less valuable because the planning wasn't there. I want to make this real for people because I want the emotion to be there as fuel so that they deal with something that's not pleasant to think about because they know it matters to people they care about. It matters to their family. It matters to their customers. It matters to their employees. It matters to all the family members of your employees. Enough emotion to make this real so that they'll deal with what many human beings don't want to deal with, which are these really bad situations. So give us an example of how it hurt this past client who passed away when their spouse had to go figure out how to sell this company and try to run it and pick up the pieces along that way. What did it cost? How did it hurt that surviving family?
Well, I mean, I've seen people lose everything but their home because, you've got a $10 million business with $8 million of debt and it's making a couple $1,000,000 a year. And then the key person dies, the sales team floats off to another organization, the sales stop, and then the bank comes in and just takes everything because, you can't keep it going, or you fold it into bankruptcy and try to do a reorganization over time. But yeah, you can literally lose everything if you don't have your avenues open, non-competes with your key employee, an understanding of who's going to run the business if you die. Maybe a life insurance death benefit would be nice to keep things funded or replace the business. An understanding as to whether your bank loans will all be called, whether the bank could call the loan. So these things regularly happen when people die or when people can't run their own business anymore.
Where do you see, when you look at the average business owner? Now, I'm going to give a different take simply because people who end up with us self-select that they want to build their business independent of themselves, right? That's part of what our core promise to a client is. So there's some self-selection there. And I know there's some overlap if we Venn diagram between joint clients, but you have other clients that don't. I guess my question for you is, how do you see the average business owner prepares herself or himself, or doesn't prepare for, a succession situation, whether it's temporary or permanent? We think, oh, I'll have time in that case to say or do something, but no, it happens. How do you see that the average business owner does or does not prepare for this?
A lot of it depends on to what degree they care about their family and to what degree their family is reliant upon the business. If you love your family and your family's reliant on the business, then you'll typically have a pretty good relationship with a life insurance agent and pay the price to make sure that there's going to be liquidity. Normally, when I do the estate planning for that type of family, we talk through who are the key employees, who has a non-compete, who doesn't have a non-compete, what is the entrepreneur's vision for who could run the company if the entrepreneur isn't going to be there anymore. Thankfully, with your clients, David, and the Maui Mastermind clients, there's usually a great coach relationship, which makes a big difference
Sure.
when somebody dies or becomes incapacitated. And many people are in an industry and have friends within the industry. And if they can reach out and say, "Hey, Harry and John, I'm in Cincinnati, you guys are in Cleveland and Detroit. If I die, will you help my spouse keep the business open? And if you die, I'll help your spouse keep the business open." And exchange emails and just say that can make a tremendous difference in whether those companies are going to survive or even thrive, as opposed to the family being just a deer in the tracks, sitting in the headlights in the middle of the night with no ability not to be hit by a car.
On this very subject, I'm thinking of clients, Alan. First of all, your comment about having at least had the conversation. What are the capabilities of your current employees? Joanne, is she capable of stepping in as the number two to the number one? What types of decisions is she capable of? What types of decisions are beyond her capacity? What a useful thing. Hey, day-to-day stuff under $20,000 decisions, Joanne can make that. If it's above there, you know what? I have a mastermind group. These are 4 other individuals. We've been getting together for once a month for the last 15 years. All of them would be willing that they could be a second set of eyes to approve a big decision if you need counsel for that, from that part. Just that I love that idea from that. Your comment about who are people who are in your industry that are outside of your direct competitive space, I love that as well, especially if I've invested in those relationships such that, here's one thing that we've talked to our clients about. Hey, if you have a mastermind group, your spouses might not want to be part of what you do in the business, many cases, right? Some cases, their husband and wife are business partners and actively doing the business and also outside of it, but many cases they're not. We've said, bring your spouses to some of the interactions with your mastermind team. I know for me, my wife Heather has come to probably 6 or 7 over the last 18 years I've had my mastermind group of the interactions. And now she's got relationships with these people so that, heaven forbid, I'm, brain dead in a coma. She's got some other people who are very smart business people who we care and love each other and would do this for each other. But Heather has to have a layer of trust and comfort to know who she can go to. Otherwise, it's going to be time of amazing emotional distress and duress. She's not going to have the same ability to go to them. So I love those ideas here. Any other comment on this before I shift us forward in the conversation?
I think most people are not aware that a surviving spouse is normally very disoriented, very lacking of confidence, and approached very strongly by everyone. So that spouse who you see as being a good partner who can handle things, for about a year and a half after the death, may really not be in any condition to handle things, and they will put their head in the sand, and out from somewhere comes some brother that they haven't seen in a long time who doesn't have much to do, and that just completely strangles the business. So you really have to give strong thought to who's going to be there and be very clear with that person who's going to be the surviving spouse as to what should be done.
As you say that, Alan, I think as I look back, if you would have asked me this in my 30s, no one dies, no one gets hurt, just people who are really, really old that happens to. But over the last 25 years, what I've seen is I've seen a number of clients whose spouses have died, cancer, heart attacks, strokes, other car accidents, other pieces with that. And I'm thinking of one specific client. She and her husband did a business, I'll call it jointly. It was a contracting business. He came up through the trades and knew tremendous amount about how to do that type of business in terms of the operationally, to do the contracting work or work with the subcontractors to get the work done, or his employees. She did some of the back office function part-time. She was also raising their kids. He had a heart attack. Now, it turned out this was not his first heart attack. When I learned about that, I was, oh my gosh, we didn't prepare the right way. The good news is he had done a lot of the work to build strategic depth. The bad part of it was his wife was woefully unprepared. As you said, she's in shock, the love of her life partner, and in his 50s is now gone. And I remember having conversations with her. I wasn't their direct coach. They worked with someone else in our company, but I care enough about her that I got involved. I talked with their CPA, who was also had a good enough relationship. And I hadn't thought about it this way, Alan, but you're right. Between the advisor team giving input, we helped her deal with some pretty tough stuff. Like, for example, this is at a time when pricing costs for her had gone way up. It was in a very heavily inflationary time, so she had to change her pricing. That was scary to her. We had to tell her, look, you cannot be staying here with your pricing. You're going to need to have a 12 or a 15% increase because your cost inputs have all gone up because of supply chain issues and other parts. And how do you handle that? Your main person who dealt with all the field staff, he left. He went to start his own business. How do we deal with that part of it? So that was a shaky one. Let's come back here. You talk about non-competes. And so can you describe, we're going to get into non-competes and non-solicitation for a moment, non-solicitation of employees or of customers, et cetera. First of all, what are those two things? Under what circumstances are they enforceable or not enforceable? Go there for a moment. We're talking now around it with your key people who you don't want to, at the wrong moment, jump ship and take clients or steal business away. And this most commonly is going to happen with probably sales leaders and sales staff are the most likely people to abandon ship, bringing business with them. The second most common would be that the peer producers are more likely to do that as well. It's less common that your administrator is going to go start a competing business. Just personality and style is different than that. So Alan, if you would, what are those two? Under what circumstances are they able to affect the purpose and what circumstances are they not?
Right. So ideally for the business owner, you have a non-competition covenant, which would prevent somebody from competing against your business. If I'm in the widget business, we manufacture widgets, we sell widgets, we design widgets. You agree that if you leave me, you can't do anything relating to widgets for 3 years. And I pay you extra money. I pay you very well for that. So that would be a non-competition covenant. Now, they don't work in California, and the Federal Trade Commission was about to pull the carpet from under many employers, but I don't think that's going to happen now. But that would be a non-competition covenant. The non-competition covenant would also say that if you leave, you can't have a relationship with any of my customers. We sell customers widgets, but if you leave, we don't want you to go and try to sell something else to our customers because that could mess up the relationship. By contrast, the non-solicitation agreement says, you can go work for a competitor, but you can't approach our customers. You can't approach our employees and try to poach our employees. You just go work for the competitor quietly. And then at least there's less damage to our business. And in exchange for asking the employee to sign that, you might give them a bonus, you might give them a percentage of ownership, or you might just say, sorry, you can't work here anymore unless you sign this agreement. And maybe you won't get a 3-year agreement. Maybe you'll get a 90-day agreement, but at least 90 days gives you time to mobilize and surround the customers before a person leaves your business and goes and competes with you, even while they're working with you.
Yeah, and staying with this for a moment here, I'm hearing what you're saying, that some states are going to enforce or not. We had a medical client, one of their physicians, they had a 20 plus provider business. One of the physicians went away after an argument and started up her own practice. And, in their area, it was enforceable. Why? Because there was a reasonable buyout clause for that non-compete. It was a couple $100,000 if memory serves me correct. And the judge ruled that, hey, this is an enforceable one and you need to pay this. And, still was a disruption, probably did ultimately cost them $500,000 or more of money, but at least they had something that made it less than that. But you talked about in here about, even, and I've told this to clients, look, if you can't get a 2 or a 3-year non-compete or something a long 5-year, right? Can you at least get yourself 6 months or 12 months? Why? Can you give yourself a window? You talked about surrounding your customers or your employees. It's that immediate moment that you're still dealing with the disruption of losing a key person, that if I can just have a pause, plus even that 6-month period, their relationship with those other people deteriorates. And now I can fill in a new relationship that gets a foothold and roots that are growing before they come in and try to take that business. And I don't know, Alan, I'm curious what you would comment. I remember telling a number of clients, look, I don't believe in having partners unless a partner brings something really special to the table that you can't just hire as an employee. And I told them, I said, there might be one exception I have to that. The one exception to that might be if I'm concerned with retaining and making it difficult for someone to leave or making them want to stay, a very small minority stake in a company with very clear defined buy-sell arrangements such that if they were to leave the business, I could buy them out of the business, or if I wanted to exit them, I could buy them out, triggered by something I control. I'll pay them a fair amount for when they're leaving. Let's say they bought in for 100 grand. Maybe I'll buy them out for 125 or 150. But in my understanding, and you'd have to correct me because this is your expertise, that now makes it on a buy-sell arrangement. A non-compete is much more enforceable, even in Gulp, the state of California. Gulp.
You are correct.
So speak sure about that. What are your thoughts about that?
You are correct. It is a good idea to give somebody a little piece of the ownership if you're in a state where that's what's required to make it enforceable. It also doesn't hurt to have people thinking like owners.
Sure. We're staying in this for a moment, though. Is there any advice you can give to us in general terms about making sure that we can reasonably be able to buy this person out if we part ways? We don't want to be stuck in a partnership with a minority partner. We also want to make sure we have the right to sell the company should we want to, the drag along rights that minority person can't say, well, I own 1% and you can't sell this because of that. Speak to that for a moment, then I'll come back and I'm going to give some coaching to any of our audience about the only circumstance where this is probably appropriate so that they don't think, oh, I should give my people equity simply because they heard us talk about the front end of the conversation.
Right. Well, this morning I was drafting an operating agreement, and the 10% owner, if he leaves because of cause, if we fire him, then we buy him out at book value as determined by the CPA. If we terminate him without cause, then we're going to give him 10% of the value of the company minus a 35% discount to take into account that he doesn't have control or marketability. And it's a great opportunity for a young executive in a growing company. But you've got to think it through. And you've got to read the agreement and think through, what if he dies? What if he becomes incapacitated? What if he competes? What if I die? What do I expect from him? And there's no substitute for reading the agreement and making sure that it reasonably covers the bases.
I mean, what you're saying, first of all, that must have been an exciting morning, Alan, drafting and operating. I can't think of it. Doesn't get any better than that, does it? So to our audience out there, one thing I know about Alan, Alan will be doing law work, legal work through his entire lifespan because he just loves it. He gets a gleam in his eye about doing interesting, complicated legal matters. And the rest of us go, I'm so glad he finds that so fascinating that he brings his great intellect to bear on it, because the rest of us are saying, just give us give us the answer, give us the agreement. I will read it through, but don't make me have to learn this stuff myself. But coming back to that, I loved it for cause at book value, which is almost always a very low number, depressed number, because you've got depreciated assets and other parts. Or if it's not for cause, I love that you put in there that we probably have some formula that shows what it's going to be priced at, but the 35% discount for lack of control and lack of marketability, which is very normal from a valuation standpoint, but not as common to see in an actual buy sell in a partnership arrangement. I love that you put that in there. That was a sophisticated ad. So I just want to share the now, and if you have a comment, please make about it. But my experience has been most owners are too quick to think, oh, I need to give equity to get this person to stay. And I tell clients all the time, equity is not what's needed to keep most people there. The cases where you want to consider giving equity would be when somebody has something special enough that you can't just buy that talent and relationally keep that talent, that you need something over and above. And what I've noticed is many people who give equity, I two clients, Alan, in the last 30 days that came to me, they're brand new clients, and they have partners in this situation where they value their partnership arrangement when they let the person buy in, or these people buy in. They did it on a crazily low formula, really 50%, 30% of what it should have been. And now it's a little bit too late. They feel constrained with that. And my comment, if they ever were to do it again, I gave them different advice for how to approach it. One would be, we should value this truly what's the market rate. And so if someone's buying in 5%, value what that 5% of the actual enterprise value is today. But here's where they get stuck. They say, Alan, we agreed on a price, but they're buying in 5% now, another 5% in a year, another 5% in a year, and they're using the same price, but they're a rapidly growing company. And my advice to them saying, well, look, they can buy 5% in today for a reasonably fair price. However, we should revalue it in a year. If you've got 50%, or one of these clients had double the operating profit this year than last year, the company was worth at minimum twice as much, but they still gave them the rock bottom price from before. So I guess I would counsel, they need to pay something for the equity. I wouldn't do it just because you think their promise is there. Number two, they can earn in by taking less money in payment and using that to fund in, but you need to have a good buy-sell arrangement for that. Alan, you gave us a wonderful example of book value, formulaic with a discount, et cetera. I really appreciated that. And it needs to be something that you control. But let's come back to the succession planning, Alan. So one thing we need to worry about is who's in charge. Do I need to have that in writing, or do I just need to tell, my person who's my power of attorney or my spouse, Joanne's in charge if I get hit by the bus? Or what does that look like from a practical standpoint?
It depends on how strong Joanne is.
Okay.
If Joanne is fairly strong, it's fine just to have a letter of intent or a business advisory committee provision that says that she's encouraged to rely upon them. If Joanne is not going to be that strong psychologically, then it would be better to appoint Joanne to be co-trustee with a trusted friend or advisor, and have the trusted friend or advisor head up the business situation. So Joanne can say, hey guys, I don't know. Harvey's handling this. Harvey, who's been our CPA for 26 years, he's going to handle this. He knows how it all works. So it varies from person to person and from family to family.
That makes a lot of sense. So here's my second to last question for you today in this episode, Alan, which is, if you could have a business owner take 3 simple first steps with respect to succession planning, simple things that they could do in less than 5 hours of total time, what would the first 3 simple steps you would hope that they would take based on this conversation we've been having here today?
Tell me who your family can trust. Take a pause here. I'll have to edit this. Tell me who your family can trust. Tell me what needs to be done almost immediately in the event of your death or incapacity. And tell me whether you think the business can be saved or whether it needs to be sold. And explain those things to me with your spouse there. And let's make sure that your business advisors understand what you've just told me.
I love it. Simple 3 things. Who is it we can lean on and trust inside and outside the business? Number 2, what are the things that would need to be done within the first few days, in the first 30 days? And is it a viable thing for the business to be operated without me here, or does it really need to be sold? And Alan, I'll add 2 more. What I encourage our clients to do is, many of them think, well, I'll get around to that. And I say, well, worst comes to worst, have a conversation with whoever you think would be that important person, but get a recorder going. Record that conversation. You can get it transcribed later on if you need to, but at least you have a situation that says, look, if I were hurt, here's the first things. We need to make sure that these 2 customer relationships, they need care, love, and attention because they represent 40% of our operating profit from these 2 customers. And we need to make sure that the lender, there is a provision that they could call the loan. We need to calm them down by letting them know who's in charge with that. And I'll tell you that this other competitor has been known to try to creep in. So here's how we defend. And if we do need to sell, here are the investment banker or business brokers I think you should talk with for that sale. And here's how it should be looked at in the valuation. And if it were there, here's what I would recommend in terms of a range of sale prices that you're probably going to have. And watch out for this. And just having that stream of consciousness conversation is worthwhile, because it's better than not having anything. And then the second comment I have here, Alan, is I'll commonly tell my clients as their coach, I say, well, you need to have decision level authorities for who the deciders are in your company, right? It's pretty darn simple. You've got 5 main leaders on your leadership team. What types of decisions And I usually have them to design that in two different categories: the decisions that are within their area in the company and decisions in globally within the company. So Joanne, she might have any decision that's $20,000 or less she can make. She's competent to make in an emergency situation. When I'm around, I might tell her, any decision that's under 10,000, you make it, but inform me. Above 10,000, you recommend it, I'll make the final call. Over 20 grand, you recommend it, I'll make the final call. But somebody else, Ralph, I might say, Ralph, any decision less than 5,000, you make it, but let Joanne and me both know. Above 5,000, you need somebody else's set of eyes to actually give the final approval. And by doing that, and then formally telling my team, heaven forbid I'm ever hurt, Joanne is number 2 in line to run things. Ralph is currently number 3 for that emergency situation. Simple steps like that reduce fear, uncertainty, doubt, FUD factor, which means the rest of my team in a stressful situation behave at their best, not frozen like a deer in the headlights. Any last comments for you? And I've got one last question after that for you.
No, I think you covered it beautifully.
So here's my last comment or question for you. If you had just 30 seconds to give one last piece of advice to a business owner that has not yet done any real serious preparation for an emergency succession situation, what's the last 30 seconds of counsel you would give to them?
Well, close your eyes and imagine that it has happened and where everybody is at when you haven't done anything. Just feel that pain for 30 seconds. You can't even imagine the pain your family and your employees and your customers will go through. If you could just give us 2 or 3 hours or 2 or 3 minutes to provide some guidance, you could save a lot of nightmares. I think that would be my 30-second.
I love it. So ideally, we have this big, beautiful package, but we can take an hour and reduce by 30% the pain and suffering of that and increase the successes. We can take 4 or 5 hours and maybe do 80% of the most valuable stuff by doing that, just that simple few things that we've talked about here. I love that. Alan, thank you for sharing what is a lifetime of expertise with the audience here for the Business Coach podcast. It really means a lot. So we really value you sharing what has been 35 plus years in the legal profession, dealing with the aftermath of these situations and also dealing with the preparation to make the aftermath go well. Thank you for doing that, Alan. I so appreciate that.
Thank you, David. I've learned a lot from you over the years, and I hope that people who listen to this or watch this help others with the information.
And I think that's a good point. Maybe we'll leave that as our last takeaway. Who are 5 other business owners that you can share some of what you've learned today, people that you care about and you want them to thrive and succeed? You can maybe give them an encouraging nod, nudge, push to do some simple steps for their succession planning to protect their loved ones as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this week on The Business Coach. I look forward to seeing you again next week on our next episode. Bye-bye.